Welcome to the Deep Dive. We cut through the noise, getting you right to the heart of the world's most critical intelligence. Okay, so today, we are diving deep into the latest Stylo News Strategic Watch list. China Taiwan Strategic Assessment. This one's dated August 26, 2025. Our mission, like always, is to give you a really clear understanding of what's happening between China and Taiwan, especially focusing on the key insights from this expert analysis.
Yeah, and what jumps out right away from the executive summary is how quickly tensions have ramped up. We're talking just the last 6 hours. But, it's not primarily about tanks and jets this time. What we're seeing is this complex mix of legal moves, diplomatic pressure, and critically information warfare. This kind of subtle multi-front pressure really ups the risk of someone making a mistake, a miscalculation. Especially, and this is important, because the whole information space is so polarized now, just full of misinformation. It feels less like a direct military standoff and more like strategic chess in the shadows.
That's a really key distinction, isn't it?
Yeah.
It means we've got to look past the obvious headlines. And what's fascinating in this report is how it talks about action. We usually think troop movements, right? But what kinds of moves are we actually seeing that aren't the usual military stuff? And, what's the impact?
Well, the assessment lays out 5 potential courses of action, gives probabilities, timelines for each, all based on what they've seen very recently.
Oh.
And interestingly, the most probable one isn't direct military force at all. Top of the list with a 35% probability, high confidence over maybe a 2-week horizon is sustained legal and diplomatic pressure by China. So this means China actively using international law, diplomatic channels, to push back against U.S. and allied naval operations there. The goal seems to be to sort of weaponize international law, trying to undermine things like freedom of navigation, bolster their own maritime claims, but without firing a shot.
Right, so a legal and diplomatic push. Try to change the rules of the game without direct conflict. What would be the concrete signs? What should we be looking for to see if this is really happening?
Okay, you'd watch for a definite increase in official Chinese statements, legal arguments, diplomatic protests, like multiple per week, specifically targeting U.S. or allied naval activity, maybe formal complaints filed in international bodies, challenging existing maritime rules. And online, you'd see state media and social media really pushing pro-China narratives, getting official hashtags trending and keeping them there. As for triggers, well, any U.S. or allied naval ops near the Taiwan Strait or South China Sea could set it off, or any big political shifts in Taiwan itself.
Okay, that gives a pretty clear picture of that non-military pressure. But is the traditional military option completely gone, or is it still part of this whole complex situation?
Oh, it's definitely still there, just maybe a bit less likely right now. The report puts limited military demonstrations by the PLA at about 25% probability. Again, looking at a 2-week time frame, medium confidence on this one. This would be China doing sort of calibrated military exercises near Taiwan, maybe in disputed waters. The idea isn't to start a war, but to signal we're serious, to deter what they see as provocations. It's messaging through military presence, basically. Indicators for that. You'd look for official PLA exercise announcements, more PLA planes and ships buzzing near Taiwan's air defense ID zone. That's the buffer zone Taiwan monitors. And naturally, you'd see Taiwan's own military go on a higher alert status.
Seems like a very careful balancing act then, showing strength, but trying not to tip things over the edge.
Yeah.
You mentioned a blend of maneuvers, though. Are there other, maybe sneakier ways pressure is being applied here?
Yeah, that leads us to what the report calls escalation to gray zone operations. That's got a 15% probability, maybe a 3-week horizon. And this is where things get, quite murky. It's about intensifying pressure without direct military force, but still causing real strategic pain. Operating in that fuzzy area between peace and war. Think like major cyber attacks hitting Taiwan's government or key infrastructure, or coordinated disinformation campaigns trying to create chaos and mistrust, or even targeted economic pressure, maybe sanctions on companies linked to Taiwan. The goal is to destabilize, to wear down resilience without actually launching an invasion, just constant low-level harassment.
Wow. Okay. So the battlefield really is shifting. It's digital, it's economic, it's informational. How are the U.S. and its allies pushing back against all this?
Well, on their side, the report sees U.S. and allied naval presence operations. Also at 15% probability, medium confidence, 2-week horizon. These are basically deliberate shows of force, freedom of navigation operations, naval deployments in the area. The purpose is twofold, really. One, reassure partners like Taiwan. 2, deter China by showing they're present and capable. So you'd see things like publicized U.S. or allied warships sailing through the Taiwan Strait or South China Sea, joint military drills with partners in the region, and official statements reaffirming commitments to Taiwan.
Okay. And with all these tensions, all these different pressures, is there any real chance of things just cooling down? Or are we sort of stuck on this upward ramp?
The report does mention de-escalation and diplomatic engagement, but frankly, it gives it very low confidence, only a 5% probability, maybe over a 4-week horizon. This would mean China, Taiwan, maybe others, actually starting dialogue, confidence-building measures, perhaps with some international help. The signs would be obvious. Actual talks starting up, less hostile language from everyone, maybe international mediators getting involved. But unfortunately, the assessment right now suggests it's not very likely in the short term.
Okay, so those are the potential paths.
Wow.
Now, let's link that back to what's actually been seen the last 36 hours, you said. What are the immediate real-time trends?
Right. The key indicators overview uses this color-coded system, makes it pretty clear we've got a bright red light on the escalating volume and tone of official Chinese legal and diplomatic statements. So China is definitely ramping up the frequency and the harshness of its challenges to naval operations, just like that top course of action suggested.
Okay, red light there. What else?
Another red light for escalating social media polarization and disinformation. That means the online arguments are getting worse, more divided, and there's a noticeable increase in stuff that looks like deliberate misinformation campaigns.
Not good. Anti-military signs.
That's a yellow light. Emerging PLA military activity near Taiwan. So nothing huge and new like major announced exercises, but their routine activity levels and readiness are still up. They're watching, basically.
And the U.S. response.
That's got an orange light. Observed U.S. and allied naval operations confirms they are continuing their presence and scheduled activities in the region.
Okay, and the chance for talks.
That's a black light, meaning no observed initiation of cross-strait or multilateral dialogue. Zero movement there. So, yeah, the bottom line is the diplomatic and information fronts are really hot right now. Military is watchful, maybe simmering, but not boiling over just yet. And diplomacy. Ice cold.
That's a really sharp snapshot. But let's zoom out for a second. How have things actually changed compared to, say, last week? What are the bigger currents here, especially thinking about what's happening inside Taiwan?
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting. There have been some pretty significant political shifts within Taiwan recently, and they're having real ripple effects. The report notes this clear rise in public focus, and maybe anxiety too, about the upcoming 2025 Taiwanese presidential election. It's becoming a huge factor. And we just saw this recall campaign against opposition KMT lawmakers fail. Plus, a referendum on nuclear power also failed. Now, these might seem like just domestic issues, but strategically, they've really strengthened the opposition's hand in the legislature. And, maybe more importantly, they've highlighted some potential weaknesses for the ruling DPP party. This internal stuff is absolutely key right now.
So, Taiwanese domestic politics aren't separate. They're actually feeding into these bigger regional tensions. How has Beijing reacted to all this internal movement?
Beijing's reaction has been very clear, publicly condemning these political events, calling them destabilizing, and forcefully repeating their standard line against Taiwan independence. But what's also really noticeable, compared to maybe a few weeks ago, is how Beijing's focus has shifted. It's less about general cross-strait stuff now, and much more specifically about the 2025 election and its potential outcomes. They're clearly trying to use that politically.
Right. So this raises a good question. How are these internal shifts in Taiwan and Beijing's strong reactions actually affecting the key decision makers in Taipei, Beijing, maybe even Washington?
Okay, for the DPP leadership in Taiwan, these recent political bumps have definitely led to internal discussions about, needing to reform, maybe adjust their approach to cross-strait relations. Premier William Lai Ching-te even publicly said they need to do some soul-searching, so they recognize things are changing internally.
And the opposition?
The KMT leadership is feeling pretty buoyed by the DPP's recent issues. You can probably expect them to push harder in the legislature and significantly really push for restarting some kind of dialogue with Beijing. That's a big potential shift.
What about Beijing itself?
Well, Beijing, meaning the Taiwan Affairs Office, they've basically doubled down on their hardline stance, condemning the political events, calling them destabilizing, lots of tough talk. But it's interesting, while the rhetoric is up, the report notes no major military posture change in this period. Seems like they're playing more of a political and information game for now.
And the U.S.?
The United States government.
Right.
Pretty steady. Continuing its support for Taiwan's democracy, its defense. No big policy shifts reported. They seem to be watching closely, maintaining their position.
It's really clear how interconnected it all is, isn't it? Internal Taiwanese politics echoing across the strait and beyond. Now let's dig into something absolutely crucial here. The information battlefield and public feeling. What's the mood like, particularly online? How's that playing into things?
Well, the sentiment analysis from X, formerly Twitter, over the last 36 hours, it paints a pretty grim picture, honestly. Overall sentiment is heavily negative, like 62% negative, driven mostly by anxiety, frustration, and just this background fear about conflict, about Chinese interference. It's a very tense online environment.
And within that tension, how are specific topics being discussed?
Yeah.
Like the election you mentioned. Can people even talk constructively?
Not easily, no. If you look at hashtags like hashtag Taiwan election or hashtag Taiwan election 2025, the conversation is super polarized. You do see some positive stuff, maybe 45% about democracy, young people getting involved, that kind of thing. But a bigger chunk, somewhere between 35 and 60%, depending on the specific thread, is negative. People worrying about Chinese meddling, the economic impact of tensions, the risk of things escalating. It's very emotional, very divided.
That sounds like a powder keg almost, especially with misinformation potentially fueling those fears. Is this just a Taiwan thing, or are our neighbors feeling it too?
No, it's definitely regional. You see users in Japan, South Korea, Southeast Asia chiming in, expressing real concern about instability spilling over. About 65% of replies from those areas on crisis hashtags are negative. And yeah, the report highlights just how much misinformation and just plain nasty exchanges are flying around. It makes any kind of real dialogue incredibly difficult. The main thing is driving the negativity. It's the perception of rising military tension, the high stakes of the Taiwan election, official statements from the US, Japan, Korea, the constant drumbeat of misinformation, and that underlying economic worry. It all feeds into this negative loop.
Okay, that's a huge amount of noise, emotion, and frankly, potentially bad information out there. Which brings us to a critical point for anyone listening. How can you navigate this? How do you find reliable information when everything feels so polarized and maybe even manipulated? Where should people look?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Source credibility is absolutely vital here. The report itself says it uses a lot of social media data, especially for tracking sentiment and getting those very early warnings. But, and this is it stresses that traditional news outlets like the South China Morning Post, SCMP, or Korea's financial news, Mangfu Yonoa, are fundamental for getting structured, fact-checked reporting. These outlets are seen as credible, they have editorial processes, they usually show their sourcing, and what they report tends to line up with official statements and known facts. They're like anchors in this storm of information.
So social media gives you the vibe, maybe an early heads up, but for the actual facts, you need those established news sources.
Precisely. Social media is great for, taking the temperature, seeing what people are yelling about, but it needs corroboration, always. From multiple reliable sources if possible. It's just too noisy, too easy to manipulate, too prone to disinformation otherwise. If you see some narrative blowing up online but you can't find it confirmed in places like SCMP or other reputable outlets, you should be very skeptical. Understanding that difference between the fast, often messy flow of social media and the slower, more verified pace of traditional journalism, that's really key to staying properly informed here.
That is incredibly useful, practical advice for anyone trying to make sense of this. Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. What's the big picture takeaway from this deep dive into the Stylo News assessment?
Well, if we step back and connect the dots, what this assessment really highlights is a kind of fundamental shift, I think. You look at this current environment, the legal pressure, the economic levers, the information campaigns playing such a huge role, and you have to ask, is our whole global idea of security changing? It feels like it's moving way beyond just military strength. Now it involves law, economics, the digital world. These are the new battlefields. So maybe the provocative thought to leave you with is this. Given this shift, what does it actually mean for how nations cooperate or how they build resilience in the years ahead? If conflict and competition are increasingly fought on these non-military fronts, Well, how ready are we really for that? How do we adapt? It's not just about armies anymore. It's about controlling the narrative, the legal arguments, the economic flows. That's a profound change to grapple with.
A really profound question indeed. This has been a fascinating look into a very complex, very fluid situation. We've seen multi-layered pressure, significant political shifts inside Taiwan, and this incredibly polarized information war, all swirling around the upcoming 2025 election. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. As always, stay informed, stay critical, and keep questioning the information you see. We'll catch you next time.